stretch my legs one last time.
I heard Salidra come in, so I think she went down for tea.
This one. Yes, actually, Steve is streaming this. Are we live, Steve? You're on. Right. Hello, streamers. We're waiting for some stragglers, so hang with us. Linda.
Now that people are in the basement, you can't tell what they're doing. Are they standing around chatting or briskly getting tea and hurrying back?
I was thinking we need some kind of like announcement thing down there. You could like have a thing that would announce down there. Because at one of the breaks yesterday, John Jennings, went down to see if anyone was down there. It's like, that seems inefficient.
Yeah, we need like the intermission bell. Ding, ding, and the lights flash.
Once we get a permit, it's going to be live streamed down there at the same time.
Ah, nice.
Huh.
So do we need to use the other mic when you guys are speaking in order for the streaming to work? They'll be able to hear you?
Yeah. I mean, all the mics are streamed.
To hear it.
But we have to speak into the mic.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we should grab that.
You guys are going to be chatting today.
Let's hope.
Yes, we really hope. That's right.
It's going to be a long
Don't leave us
evening
hanging.
otherwise.
It's funny that we have all these mics when we're sitting in this little thing, but technology.
That's right. There may be more people listening online than we have actually here. Shall we start?
Let's, So let's start with Refuge in Bodhicitta. And for those streaming, this is a common Refuge in Bodhicitta prayer, but it's not the one we use here every Sunday. And in the course of this course, we're actually going to touch on some of the themes in Refuge, actually in Bodhicitta. And the dedication also touches on themes. We'll touch on. So I thought it would be nice if we actually use this before we do maybe like a few minutes of shamatha to start things off. So let's, I don't do Om Say very often. Until full enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the practice of generosity, patience, and the other perfections, may I awake for the sake of all beings. Until full enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the practice of generosity, patience, and the other perfections, may I awake for the sake of all beings. Until full enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the practice of generosity, patience, and the other perfections, may I awake for the sake of all beings. Well, welcome everybody. We've never done this on a Monday. It's kind of interesting to start your week off and immediately have a class. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. We thought we'd start tonight with go around and do some introductions, and we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll have each of you tell us your name, how long you've been practicing, and briefly why you came to the class, what you're hoping to get out of it. That would be helpful for us. So I'm Sally Allworth. I am not one of the teachers here at KCC. I've been practicing since 1997 with KCC, so Jeff and I always feel like we're in a pretty good position to function as peer facilitators for this kind of exploration. What I'm hoping to get out of the class was that somebody would show up, and so my desires have been satisfied.
I'm Jeff, and Sally and I came together in '97, so we've been doing this the same amount of time. We are always the principal beneficiaries of this. It's always awkward. We're as Sally said, we're not teachers at KCC, but because we always feel fraudulent when we're asked to teach these, we do better practice in the weeks and months leading up to them to try to, scramble together something. So, and then we have to prepare the class. So it's wonderful that we get asked to do this, so that we go through this process ourselves. So I've already kind of had some benefit. So that's why I'm here. And you can just jump in or go around the circle. I'm not sure how you guys want to do this.
And we are going to ask people to use
that's right. Follow the mic. That's right. We got to talk into the mic for the streamers.
Yeah.
I'm Cynthia, and I started meditating before I came to KCC, but I've been at KCC since my son was young, but I couldn't say exactly how young because I was in a fog. And I'm here because I have an idea of what the unbounded view is, but I don't really know. So you can tell me.
We'll provide the reading.
I'm Linda. I've been coming to KCC for 3.5 years. I did some meditation before that, but I didn't really meditate daily until I took a class called Care and Feeding of Your Daily Practice, and that inspired me. So thank you, and that's why I'm back.
That's so nice.
I'm Phil, and I've been at KCC something like 3 years, I think, something like that, and dabbled before that. There's that old difference between a dabbling duck and a diving duck, so now I'm trying to be a diving duck, and I'm here because I keep looking at the mind which cannot be looked at, and I just need all the help I can get in that. So, open to whatever arises.
I'm Peter, and I came to KCC sometime between 2010 and 11, and I'd been meditating some before that, looking for the right place to be, and like Cynthia, I don't know what the unbounded view is, and I thought I'd stop in at least tonight and see what I could find out.
My name's Susan. I took refuge in 1974, and I'm a terrible student. And I spent an enormous amount of time alone at home, and I thought this might inspire me in that kind of organizing my practice.
Very nice.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
My name is Michael. I've been coming to KCC, are those the right initials?
Those are correct,
for
that's right.
about 3 or 4 weeks. And I'm not an absolute beginner, but I certainly am at that threshold stage as regarding Buddhist practice. Most of my background is in Jungian psychology and in Vedanta. And I feel this is similar, but this has intrigued me. And everything I've read about Buddhism is encourages you to find a teacher. Don't try to do it solely on your own study. And I felt very comfortable coming here, having met Jeff at Newcomers Night, and then Sally a week or two ago. And it felt like a very good place to start. So I can't help but learn something here, whatever it is, and whatever unbounded view means, I'll find out.
Excellent. At least one person will learn something.
Hi, I'm Mark. I've been visiting KCC for about 4 years now. Practice goes back 40 plus years, and dabbling in some Zen and deeply involved in the Vipassana community when our children were small. And I'm looking forward to our readings and discussion on unbounded views and emptiness.
Hi, I'm Mary Linda. I'm with him. So we've done our kind of spiritual pursuits together, and so a lot of Vipassana with young children and that sort of thing, and connected to Michael over 40 years, and so that's kind of what brought us up to Portland, and yeah, unbounded view. How could that be bad?
I'm Joe Bertnoli. I have been practicing at KCC, I think, since 2006, I believe, which seems like it was just yesterday, but going on 12 years, I guess. I was on the phone one day with Sally. I was going through a tough time, and she said, you know, Jeff and I have thought maybe you would like coming to KCC. Maybe it would be helpful for you. And at the moment, I was like, yeah, I'll try anything you suggest. And I've been here ever since. Oh, and yeah, I took you guys' class last year, and anything that can help me stay on track in my daily practice, thinking, speaking, acting, meditating, etc. Everything along those lines is very valuable, and it was helpful last year. So here I am again. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for coming and welcome.
So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about our goals for the class. What do we mean when we say the unbounded view? In one way, I feel like we don't even need to have this class. We should just have everybody go to the YouTube channel and listen to Michael's teaching from the first hour of First Sunday yesterday, which was spectacular and very much focused on the nature of mind and the pure view, and I recommend it highly. The trick here is I'm not going to tell you right now what the unbounded view is. We are going to explore that idea for all of the 5 sessions. We'll approach it from a few different directions. Really, our focus in this class is we all know conceptually, intellectually, that there's a difference between the things that we know conceptually and the experience of them. We know that the earth has existed for millions of years, and yet we still think we're the most important thing. Our sense of ourselves and how we move through the world is not really affected by the fact that we know that the scope of things is very, very large, because it just doesn't touch our experience. It's an idea to us. And when we practice, easing into this. I really, over these next weeks, we're trying to ask the question, how does our experience change, and our practice change, if we can get a little taste of the vastness of things, the scope of time, which our tradition says is without beginning and without end. Our our sense of mind, which we're told can encompass and does encompass everything, our sense of interconnection, which our tradition says is us and all sentient beings in the 3 times and the 10 directions. During this week, we're going to explore some different techniques within the practice to try and get a little taste of the direct experience of a bigger view, a bigger way of looking at the world, with the hope that will provide kind of energy to our daily meditation, energy and inspiration.
You want me to add anything? You're looking at me like I might want to add something.
You can add something, or you can go on to the next point as you like.
That seems good. One thing in terms of our daily practice, I guess this is the one thing I'll add, is that this is speaking from my own experience. It can be a grind. It can feel like getting on the cushion is a real challenge. And the same kind of aversion I have for normal activities can crop up with my practice. And for me personally, one of the biggest antidotes is to start trying to get my view bigger. And I find it inspiring to leaven my practice with things that are right in front of us, like the refuge vow, which suggests that we are going to keep taking refuge until full enlightenment. When I think about the possibility of full enlightenment, I get more excited. So for me, it's a real support to the daily practice. And just to kind of hit this point yet again, Sally and I are not teachers here, and I think particularly we're going to be out of our skis here in terms of many of the concepts that we're talking about. We don't necessarily have like comfortable familiarity with the nature of our own minds, for example.
On an experiential level.
Yeah. But these are the kinds of things that exist in our tradition and are valuable even for people who are brand new to the practice, or who have read the words for a long time but not really built a relationship with them. So that's kind of the reason we thought this class would be beneficial. We know that when we've hit the doldrums, and the one thing that qualifies us is we've hit a lot of doldrums. We have fallen into the hole of not practicing like champions. So that's really why we set this class up that way and are focusing on the unbounded view. In terms of what we mean when we talk about the view, this is going to be kind of critical to this whole enterprise that we're doing in this class. And we thought we'd just talk about what that looks like and how you try to implement that. And Sally's right. Michael talked about holding a view yesterday in an extraordinary way. And when Sally and I walked out, we were thinking, we're never going to be able to say it as well as he did. But since we're not Michael and we have to say something, here goes. We always hold views. Everything, our entire life is composed of views we hold, right? When we walk across the floor, we assume that when we put our foot down, the floor is not going to collapse underneath us. We assume that the sun will rise in the morning in the east. There are all these things that experientially really inform the way we live day to day. And so many of them are entirely constructed from our own side. And we don't necessarily examine them as views that we hold or think really that they could be changeable. So, one of the things about we always hear about Buddhism is that one of the things that characterizes our confused mind is that we're convinced that the stuff out there that we see out there is exactly the way we think it looks to ourselves, and the reactions that we have in relation to the outer world are solid and real. And so Buddhism asks us to change our view, to try different thoughts out. And it can look a lot like belief in the sense that it looks like maybe you're supposed to believe in enlightenment or reincarnation or all these other things. But the powerful thing is less to do with belief than just trying the idea on and seeing how it changes your experience.
It's make-believe.
That's right. Good job. We never talked about that. You just come up with that? Yeah, all right. Sally's pretty smart. When we start with the refuge, and of course our views change over time too. If you said a refuge prayer hundreds or thousands of times, the words can just kind of wash over you. But if you think, when we read this refuge prayer, which starts out until full enlightenment, if you think that enlightenment is something you're likely to achieve, whether in this lifetime or another lifetime, your mind naturally is different than if you think that's never going to happen. And it's a pretty thought, but not something that's relevant to your own life. And so we're going to try to experiment with these giant, and everywhere you look in the Dharma, there are these crazy aspirations and the Dharma is full of hyperbole. The dedication prayer that we have here talks about liberating all beings suffering in the three worlds. So that is just to emphasize what category of beings we're talking about here. It's not just this world, but the three worlds. You find these everywhere. And the reason, one of the reasons they exist as reminders so constantly is so that we can use them to change the way we relate to the world. So when we go through this class, each class we'll describe kind of how the process will unfold, but we'll practice trying on a different view, and we'll carry that. We're going to have some carrying practices, and you can try it out on the street, off the cushion. You can try it on the cushion too. There are a lot of different ways to do this. And it's like working a muscle. The more you fiddle with these things, the more they kind of, your mind becomes sort of pliant to them, like it's at least a possibility. That's sort of the next stage that happens. And then before long, you can coexist with them as a real possibility, and that can keep changing and changing. And some of the folks in the room who've practiced the Dharma for a long time probably hold what now seem like crazy ideas compared to when they first came to the Dharma, because that process slowly changes. What would you like to say about holding a view? Would you like to add anything?
I guess just one thing that occurred to me when you were speaking, because I've been in a little bit of a difficult work situation for a couple of months, so it's been very much in my mind. It's a place I'm really trying to apply my practice, and I was reminded of this whole idea that what we attend to becomes real, that we really do create our own reality, because things having gotten tense at work. I had an episode where somebody I have a difficult relationship with came into the room and offered to help me, and I didn't hear him and I didn't respond. And he became very upset and went to somebody else and told this whole story about how I was so angry and I shot him this terrible look, and it got it back around to me, and I thought, oh yeah, this is how this happens. Like, that was totally real to him. I was existing in a completely different reality where I didn't know the situation was unfolding. And I think those sorts of situations are easy places where we can see that the view that we're holding really alters how we receive what we encounter as we go through life. And that's one of the wonderful potentials of the Dharma, because if we're holding a view that's about a kind of radical largeness or a radical level of compassion that can actually affect the way we experience what we encounter as we go through the world. And I think also has the potential to affect how other people experience us. So one other theme we want to mention, and we'll try and touch on this again and again as the class unfolds, is the idea of not confusing the path and the fruit. So that's a way that Michael described it to us once. But we read these texts and aspiration prayers, things that have very lofty goals, the Bodhisattva vow, and it's very easy to think, I'm supposed to be like that, and take a thing that is meant to be inspiring and just turn it into something that makes you feel bad and like you're failing. Those things, if we were already those things, we wouldn't need the path. So they are visions of where we're trying to go. They're statements of what it will look like when we get there. And our job is to work with the techniques that will get us from where we are now to where we want to be. So particularly as we're engaging with some of these caring practices and trying to hold views and trying to shift things, you know, if you're really contemplating having compassion for all beings, and when you genuinely look at your experience, what you see is resistance, the goal is not to say, oh, I'm not a bodhisattva. It's to say, I'm looking, I'm seeing. I am seeing what my real experience is, which is I have resistance. What's that about? Where's that come from? What's going on there? We want to aim for something very lofty, and we want to be kind to ourselves about the fact that we're practicing. And every time we see something, it's really a cause for rejoicing. No matter how ugly it appears to us and how much we want to judge ourselves about it, it's really, it's a gift to see it clearly, and it's the fruit of our practice when we see it clearly. So, yeah, we'll keep coming back to that idea of path and fruit.
Yeah, that's an important one, because we don't want to fall into that nihilistic hole where the failure to achieve the fruit looks like a failure of the path. And it's always just good to remind ourselves, because sometimes when you're feeling low down, you can make that mistake and feel like you're very far from being a bodhisattva, and that's okay. So the class structure, this first one is slightly different in that we have a little front matter here, but in the future, the first section of the class will be a discussion where we'll discuss our experiences from the last week, and this is where we're hoping you can all help out. What we found, this is the third class we've done, is that sharing our own experiences is a way of kind of crowdsourcing wisdom and practice. Like, you can get 9 times as much experience by listening to what other people discovered. People also take these caring practices and work with them in different ways, so it's interesting to see how that goes. Then we will what is our next thing? The reading. Is it kind of out of order? Okay, so I got confused. So we'll have a reading, and this is one of those ways, though Sally and I don't get to, we're not masters of the unbound view, but we'll offer readings of people who are. And then we can kind of use those as a way of anchoring our discussion. And there's also some really nice and beautiful things out there, like Colin Rinpoche's description of the mind that we'll talk about here in a minute. Then we're going to do we're actually going to do a little practice here, which is something we haven't done, so we're going to see how that works, where we'll do a contemplation. And a contemplation is a particular kind of practice that we'll discuss a little bit later. But it'll help make more concrete these kind of subtle ideas we're working with, and make them easier to work with when we're out off the cushion. We don't want to talk about that now. We're going to talk about that later, so I don't need to go any further on that. And then at the end of the class, we'll discuss a carrying practice that you can take out and work with, and we'll all work with the same one and see how that goes. And when we come back next week, that's the thing we'll talk about. And Sally even made cool little cards that you can take with you that hold the carrying practice. So then the last thing is we really hope that this becomes kind of a conversation as we go along. So feel free to holler. It does seem like it's going to be slightly more awkward because we have to have the mic handed around, but we can manage that. I think it's nice to hear from everybody. So if you have a question or a comment as we go along, anytime today or subsequent classes, just raise your hand and we'll wrap. So that's what the classes look like. And if you can't come to one, that's okay. We would love everybody to be able to come back to them all. But even I'm going to actually miss one due to a massive scheduling gaffe. So it's okay if you miss one.
All right. That is the end of the preamble.
Yes. That's the most boring part of the 5 classes. So
Let's hope.
yeah, that's right. Let's hope it gets more interesting, though. Oh, I'm the next one too.
Yep.
So I'm guessing at least Michael probably didn't get this. You're not on our community listserv, are you? On our email. Did everybody? I don't think you probably got this. Did anybody else not get this thing we sent out about Kala Rinpoche?
The nature of mind.
Called The Nature of Mind. Here, why don't I just hand these out? Okay. This is, thank you. Sorry, streamers. Yeah, this is the same one we sent, so you're good. Thank you, sir. So one of the things that, sort of the baseline fact about the unbounded view is that it begins with our mind, which is itself sort of the thing that we're trying to find experience of as we go along the path. And it is the ultimate unbounded thing. You probably can't even say thing. And so Sally and I spent a lot of time trying to find a good description of what the nature of mind looks like, which is not easy because it's a very subtle thing. So either they tend to get too technical and complex and use a bunch of jargon, or they just kind of hand wave away in a sort of poetic way that doesn't really give you a sense of what's going on. So why don't we, I don't think it makes sense to read this out loud, but if you haven't had a chance to read this, why don't we just stop for 5 minutes? Folks streaming, sorry. Yeah, we can,
I'd like it to be read out loud. Yeah, I don't think we'd take that. I think that would be really wonderful if we could do that.
okay. That was one option. We considered that. We thought maybe it would be boring, so we'll do it then. It'll be good for the streamers too. Do you want me to do it, or do you want to go around the room and do a paragraph, or how do you want to do this? You want me to do it? You're pointing at me.
If you're willing.
Okay. Do you want to go back and forth? All right. Okay, this is a section, a short passage that comes from a book called The Dharma that Kala Rinpoche was collected, I think, from Kala Rinpoche teachings from 1986. So I'll start reading now. The fact that appropriate questions about the teaching arise in the mind at all indicates a considerable accumulation of merit brought about by virtuous thoughts and actions in the past. Nonetheless, we have only a vague, naive understanding of mind. We know that we have a mind, but there is a great deal of ignorance about its nature. What is mind, then? Mind is that which is aware, which gives rise to thoughts, emotions, and feelings such as I'm happy or I'm sad. Mind is what experiences all this. In Buddhism, we term the nature of mind emptiness. By this we mean that mind is devoid, empty of any limiting characteristics. It has no form, no color, no shape, no size, no limitation whatsoever. Analogous to this is the open space in a room. Like the space, mind is intangible and cannot be described. Just as that space itself is intrinsically empty, just as one never says, space is empty up to this point, while beyond it, space is no longer empty, so mind is intrinsically empty. If we take the illumination in the room into account, we have a further analogy, because the mind has its own kind of clarity, though not in the visual sense. The illuminating capacity is mind's inherent ability to experience. No thing in and of itself, mind nevertheless experiences everything, and that ability is clarity. We experience this when we sit quietly by ourselves and, thinking of some faraway place like New York or San Francisco, find we can call it to mind immediately. In speaking of mind, then, we can refer to its emptiness, fundamental intangibility, and to the illuminating clarity it demonstrates. Like the space and light in the room, these are not things separate from each other, but are two aspects of a single experience. The properties, emptiness and clarity, do not complete our description of mind. Mind is more than empty, a more than empty illuminated space. It is also the awareness that can decide, this is form, this is sound, this is shape. The intelligence that allows us to make judgments and recognize particular details is a manifestation of mind's unimpededness. Although the mind's emptiness, clarity, and unimpededness are inseparable, we can examine it from different perspectives and speak of them separately or in combination. The mind's essential emptiness and its clear nature taken together are what we call its unimpededness, its power to experience. The fundamental threefold nature of mind, empty, clear, and unimpeded, is I was doing this great earlier. Say it for me.
Tathagata Garbha.
Thank you. Tathagata Garbha, the seed of enlightenment, possessed by every being, human or otherwise. Tathagata Garbha is the fundamental purity of mind's intrinsic nature. In the words of Buddha Shakyamuni, this Tathagata Garbha, this seed for enlightenment, pervades all forms of life. There is not a single being that does not have it. A tantric text states that all beings are innately enlightened, but that adventitious obscurations block the experience of enlightenment. It is if through practice we begin to recognize the inherent nature of mind, we can become completely enlightened. And then a little bit later he added one more thing that I thought was kind of worth including on here. Primordial awareness, which is a term that you see a lot if you read different things, is the direct and authentic experience of the mind as empty, clear, and unimpeded, as dynamic and intelligent. Tathagata Garbha.
So, what do you think about that? Ideas, questions? Joe, could you hand fill the...
I have this feeling that I get really confuddled with my terminology. Like mind is sort of on two levels on mine. I mean, mind is sort of the voice in my head and the assumptions and ideas about gravity and causation and everything that I condition my thought process. And then there is mind in the sense of clear awareness. And when I meditate, it's just really hard to sort that out. And I feel like that's my basic block, is just sort of making a distinction between that clear light in the empty space and all this stuff, all this content that arises. And I don't know, I've always just sort of thought of mind as being that peculiarly Phil-like voice that goes on. So I feel like I need some good terminology to sort that out.
Yeah, and herein comes the kind of extent of Sally and my experience. Like I can say, oh, you're talking about the difference between the sixth consciousness and mind, as if I know what I'm talking about, and I don't really. So, yeah, I hope you don't expect us to say really wise things. That's, at one point, Sally, I looked at Sally and we were preparing for this class, and I said, I really don't know what mind is. But I suppose that's par for the course until we experience it directly, and then we start to have this different kind of experiential sense.
Yeah.
Joe's got it. Oh.
This was my understanding, and it could be completely wrong, but Phil, all those things that you described, that you see and think, the little voices and whatnot, isn't that just part of the luminosity of the mind? That part of the things arising? That it's not that that's not mind.
Yeah, I get that.
But that's just my view on it. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I think that's technically correct. That if you read the Buddhist texts, they will say primordial awareness or ordinary mind or whatever term they're using manifests as everything, and so there's nothing that we experience that is not fundamentally at bottom that big mind. But that's not our experience. I really relate to what you're saying, Phil. There was a period in my own practice where I just wrestled with that every time I sat down to do shamatha. It was like I'm chit-chatting to myself, and I feel like I'm simultaneously watching myself chit-chat while I'm chit-chatting. Like, is that it? Is that ordinary mind? Like, did I find it? The thing that's watching the other thing that's going on? And it would just like tie me up into a knot. It's sort of horrible to say. Kalar Rinpoche says basically being able to experience that in a stable way is enlightenment. And it's certainly possible to have glimpses of that. And I feel like I've had moments from time to time where it did feel like all the other stuff settled and I was still aware. And for a brief flash, I didn't need to label it or talk about it to myself. But, very brief flashes. It is hard. We are trying to speak conceptually about something that is beyond concept. Cynthia, could you?
But I get what Cynthia's saying. It makes a lot of sense. It's like the old metaphor of ocean and wave. There's no distinction. wave is manifestation of ocean. You can't separate them. And I mean, but it's just going to take a while to get there to where I really grok it. I mean,
Yeah.
In my not very good experience, my amateurish of experience, the longer that we calm the mind from having the drunken monkey, the chatter, and work with that, eventually that does calm down. We're no longer in a waterfall, and that we get into a river, and then eventually into a lake where there's calmness. I think it takes time, and everything that happens along that process is, to me, kind of fascinating, which is maybe not the point, but whatever we're doing, it's great. You know, it's okay. It's good. Maybe great is too much to put on it, but I don't ever find any time that I practice bad. It just is what it is. So that kind of acceptance of chatter, because there is a lot of chatter that arises. And kind of interestingly, I've had the opportunity to have all of that go away from being from having other mind, from having other things influence my mind and my body. For instance, very intense pain, or to watch the mind stop thinking or become kind of luminous, or to experience those different kinds of things. Now, our friends down here that did Vipassana for a long time probably have a good take on this too, but I find that after a while, that chatter begins to stop, and it becomes the mind looking at itself. Is that maybe? I don't know. Ergun Tulku
There's
and
not going to be a test on
Kalo
this.
Rinpoche have a better grasp on this than I do.
Well, and I am certainly not in a position to judge your meditative experience.
Yeah.
So.
I think one of the important things, the reason we included this and started here is because we do have to start to have some confidence that what we're looking at is this empty, clear, and unimpeded thing that we're looking for. Yesterday we did Chenrezig here, and that's a practice that's really trying to familiarize yourself with this other kind of, with this, unimpeded mind, this unconfused mind. And it's important to at least have the, kind of leave the door open in case mind walks through. You might have a chance of recognizing it. It seems like if you don't know it's there, don't try to develop a relationship with it. You might never recognize it. That recognition is the thing we're trying to open our minds up, or our minds, our experience up to. So I've heard, and I don't know how you make this distinction, but I've heard Michael mention that we'll have glimpses into, little flashes of insight into the nature of mind, and it's not stable. And how you can tell that from elaboration, I'm not totally sure, but it does seem critical that you keep that door open, so that you might have a chance to recognize those qualities. I look at Sally to see if she's going to give me a horrible glare.
I don't know whether it's helpful, but one of the other ways of describing emptiness that has resonated with me is that emptiness has no independent existence. And as I've encountered writings about it, that description is useful to me. Has no independent existence. My thumb, at least I believe, has an independent existence. There it is, but emptiness has none.
Yeah, so one of the classic descriptions of emptiness is, we're saying empty of inherent existence, and there are texts that will say, this is a pair of glasses. Where does glasses reside? Is it in the earpiece? Is it in the front part of the frame? Is it in the nose? Is it in the glass? And deconstructing it, that everything we encounter is actually made up of parts. And those parts come into being through causes and conditions. And that if you took all of the parts away, there would be no thing that is glasses, that has a kind of solid identity. That everything we experience is simply the result of the coming together of causes and conditions, and there's no thingness to things.
And with mind, that's really true. I mean, neurosurgeons can't find mind. Nobody can find mind.
They can't find consciousness, yeah.
Right. So mind is a slightly technical difference, but yeah. I mean, when you look, there's brain, there's body, but mind is different somehow. It's substanceless. Mark.
I think we have a real difficulty with words, with the language here, like what is mind? And usually mind, I think, is the way most of it think of mind is it's our thinking process, our intellect, but that's really sort of a clouded, befuddled mind that's running historic patterns we've developed and ingrained in our behavior over the years, full of obscurations. It's sort of like I've seen some people call small mind, opposed to big mind, and it certainly lacks the clarity that Kala Rinpoche is talking about here. It's all full of stuff. So when we talk about what mind is, it's like an obscured mind. The other classic images of, clarity, look at a clear glass of water, but ours is usually full of particles or mud or sediment that over time, with a good practice, you can filter out and get some clarity so we can see the glass. But normally we see this stuff. Walking or driving down the street, I see people, I get all kinds of preferences and prejudices, images, thoughts pop up in my head, emotional responses to things. That I don't consider as mind, at least not mind that Kala Rinpoche was talking about. That sort of busy mind or monkey mind or small mind. Yeah. So I think in this class we need to be cognizant of how we use mind, because it can be so many different things in our common usage. Mm-hmm. And I think here we're trying to get a more refined use of it for our purpose. Otherwise, we're in our familiar, or I'm in my familiar monkey mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the prayer, the aspirations for Mahamudra, there's a reference to the to ultimate nature as ordinary mind. And we're not Tibetan scholars. The Tibetans have many different subtle terms for the different consciousnesses and the awareness that lies behind and under all of that. But yes, I think it might be handy to, whether it's perfectly correct or not, just say, let's talk about ordinary mind when we mean primordial awareness, or say primordial awareness. But we recognize there is a real difference between the cloudy glass of water and what the water is like when everything has settled out. Joe, did you have something you wanted to say earlier?
Well, I was just going to say that I really loved this when I read it, and I hadn't read this particular teaching from Kalo Rinpoche before, and I liked it for a number of reasons. One, just that the teaching, where it says tantric texts state that all beings are innately enlightened, but that adventitious obscurations just block the experience of enlightenment. Like, that was one of the things that brought me. That was one of the things that validated Buddhism for me, having come from Western spiritual philosophy, where you're born damned, and you're guaranteed to be damned until you are saved, and those are the two black and white categories, and that wasn't working well for me, and so this notion that we're all inherently enlightened, and that we just have to work on those obscurations. I love the way that this is articulated, and the definition there of the Tathagata Garbha is, it's a very moving. This is a very moving teaching. I was going to ask you guys, Jeff, you touched upon the technical difference in English in the terms of mind versus consciousness and the Dharma. I was just wondering if you could fill that in a little bit.
I probably shouldn't. There are technical descriptions of the experience that we have, and they're interesting. They're super interesting, actually. And I have one from Trungpa Rinpoche, which I think it has the word awareness or consciousness in the title. And there is there's in Buddhism there is a thing for ordinary consciousness. It's called the sixth consciousness, which is just what Mark was talking about, and this is just this kind of, it's what we'd probably call brain, that kind of thing. The Buddhists also have this interesting kind of conception of the consciousnesses of the senses. So you have touch, scent, smell, eye. It's actually like eye, nose. It's interesting. And their idea is that that's a kind of thing that appears undiluted. Like when we smell a thing initially, it's undiluted by consciousness. It's got its own kind of character. And then, so there's 5 of those, and the 6th consciousness is this kind of just what we would call standard consciousness. I'm happy to say all that, because if I get that wrong, who cares? Then there are the 7th and 8th consciousnesses, and those were the ones I'm not going to go into, because I don't really understand those. But Trungpa Rinpoche will talk about them more wisely than I could, and you can find that book. I can send that link out if you the name of that book if you are interested in it. It's quite interesting, and it is a kind of fundamental teaching in Tibetan Buddhism, and a lot of people talk about it. The Gelugpa Geshes are focused on these subtle kind of distinctions. So anyway, they exist, and the problem is when you get into the 7th and 8th consciousnesses, we start to fall into the same kind of conceptual and linguistic murky area that we're having right now. And that's even if you understand it, which I don't totally understand. And the Tibetans have a whole number of different words for mind, and so they mean different things. I know a few of them, but I don't know the technical definitions. So you could go on forever on this. But I do think, coming back to what I'm glad I added this last thing. Primordial awareness is the direct and authentic experience of the mind as empty, clear, and unimpeded, as dynamic and intelligent. That really lays out kind of how it is distinct from everyday consciousness. The direct and authentic experience of the mind is empty. is when I read that, I have a good sense of knowing that the thing that I'm experiencing right now in this room is different. It's not that I'm not having that same experience. So I don't know why I'm talking. I should be shutting up now. Yeah.
This is a question that occurred to me this afternoon, and I thought if I'm coming to this class, I should meditate once. I mean, start formally meditating, sitting, with my back straight, and as opposed to how normally we meditate and just as it occurs to us. And based on what I had been reading that morning, it was describing thoughts, the things you were talking about, is just the clouds that come by, and that we would be trying to settle those, or that we would let them settle. And then the discussion was more, the thoughts belong, they're part of the mind too, like sometimes there's clouds, sometimes there's clear sky, and just allowing them to be, and then gradually they'll settle, gradually your mind will calm. And that made sense, but then the question that came up was this idea of kleshas, that there are things, this is seventh consciousness, there are things that come up, they're describing them as poisons. They limited them to 6, and I could immediately think of additional poisons, but it's just accepting them as such. These they didn't say you should just let be, and that you should apply antidotes
Right.
to them. And I thought, well, how on earth can you distinguish so clearly between a thought and a poisonous klesha? Sometimes they seem like they come together. Your thought can have a little klesha inside. And I thought it sounds very clear when you're reading it, but when you're actually sitting with it, trying to decide whether just allow something to play out and then go on its way, or trying to alter something. Well, this is just my first sitting, so I didn't know if this is that a stupid question, or everyone's already settled it, or
We've all settled it. Yeah.
Well, share how.
In a month, it'll all be settled for you too.
Yeah. It is not a stupid question.
No, and it's not settled.
Oh, yeah.
Just to be clear.
And I think the thing that I would say there, and this is the great sort of question to raise on a Sunday when the teachers are present. My sense of that is that those are two slightly different practices. So you might be doing a session where the practice that you've adopted is whatever arises, I'll just let it arise and I'll keep my eye on it. And it'll be there for however long it's going to be, and then it'll fade, and I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to sit and be aware with it. And it's actually a slightly different practice to say, now I'm looking for the kleshas, and I'm going to try and identify them, and when they arise, I will apply the antidote. That's a different thing to do, and they're both wonderful things to do. And I think the main thing, especially when you're beginning, is just to be clear, what practice are you doing in any given session? Because there are a lot of different ways to work with the same thing that arises. Does that seem reasonable?
That's really good.
Okay.
Should we take a break here?
Yeah, we want to take a little break, but I'm wondering, is there anything else anybody wants to get out before we take a break? Because we'll come back and we'll shift focus slightly. And Susan, I noticed at one point you had raised a hand.
She said, I can't watch TV or anything that would make things up.
How did we survive without Google? That's what I want to know.
I don't
We just
know.
wandered around in the dark.
It's wonderful. There's a word in here that I didn't understand, that I can't pronounce. It's right before obscurations. I had to look it up. I think I have a good vocabulary, and then I run across things like that, Yeah, down at the bottom.
Adventitious?
Yes, I was really glad that you were able to pronounce it so clearly. So when you were talking about your glasses, I want to share a little story about a long time ago when Thich Nhat Hanh was at Green Gulch Farm in San Francisco in Marin County. And there were a few of us in a room where he was teaching, and he took a cup and he said, I really had struggled with the idea of emptiness. And I'd heard that it was something that newcomers were not supposed to be taught or talk about, and that it could cause all kinds of difficulties. But he took a cup, and there was tea in it. And he started talking about how this didn't arise independently. And he talked about the sun that shone on the leaves in the bush where the tea was grown, and the people that came and picked that, the insects, the wind, the rain. He went on for a long time and talked about the cup being manufactured, and the clay, and the form, and the man who made the form, and the stories that he told his children at night, and the food that he ate, and the farmer that grew the food. And this is a terrible rendition of this beautiful story that I often think about. You know, he talked about the truck that transported the cup, and the man who drove the truck, and the person who made the tires, and where the material for the tires came. And I hope this is helping. I hope this is somewhat helpful. He talked about the birds that saw the truck, and the grass that was blown by the wind of the truck as it passed. And he said, so how is this cup independent? And then he let the cup drop on the floor and smashed it. And it was very beautiful. And I sometimes think about, when I'm eating something, about all the people that have gone into that, you know, to getting that piece of food into my mouth, and then all the things that happen as things, you know, kind of cycle. The other thing that I wanted to say that you touched on briefly is that I do not believe, I am completely convinced, that English has no good translation for many of these concepts that we are trying to talk about. Yeah. And I am a terrible student of Tibetan, but I do think that learning some Tibetan is a really good idea. Because a lot of things, I was talking to Lama Eric about this once, about a specific word that there is absolutely no translation in English for. And yet the word that's often used is so negative that a lot of people balk at it, when actually the Tibetan is very beautiful. So I think understanding a little Tibetan and bringing that into our language might be a really good thing. I mean, our English language is comprised of German and Dutch and French, and we've adopted all these other words. Well, why not adopt some of the words from Tibetan that, you know, where they're very refined and often very joyful. So reading a text and then reading the translation can be quite a shock.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story of Thich Nhat Hanh. That is the unbounded view.
Right.
Or certainly a much larger view than we customarily hold when we just think, why don't I have more tea? This cup, my cup. Cup I like, cup I don't like.
Well, I never found emptiness. I thought, why is it scary? I mean, nothing, not even myself, arises without, independent of anything else.
Yeah. Well, on that note, why don't we take a short break? We're a fairly small group, and we've got 4 restrooms, 2 up, 2 down. So maybe we could come back in 10 minutes. Would be wonderful. And if you're streaming at home, feel free to use the restroom and get yourself a cup of tea.
That's right. Just water. I think I'm okay, actually.
Yeah, I've got enough.
Otherwise,